Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to episode number 101 of Hobby Hotline. We are going to start today's episode paying tribute to John Carlin, brother of Chris Carlin of Upper Deck. John Carlin passed away yesterday from ALS, and we wanted to dedicate this episode to him, to the Carlin family, express our condolences to all of them. Chris is a part of the Hobby Hotline family and an integral part of the overall Hobby family, someone we've all known, I've known personally for over 15 years, a wonderful person, and our hearts go out to Chris and the whole Carlin family. Rich, anything you'd like to add before I will share a post that Chris put up on Facebook this morning and or last night, I should say, and just to take a moment to honor the family and John himself. Rich?
Anytime anybody we know passes, I always reflect back on this quote from John Donne, and no, I don't have it memorized. I am reading it. Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never descend to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. And if you really want to read a very sad post, read the post about what Chris posted about having to tell his children about their beloved Uncle John and how his kids reacted because they spoke to Uncle John in his diminished condition just about every day. And one of the worst things with ALS, your mind stays sharp and your body can't do a darn thing. And so watching a person fail like that is a brutal thing. And we at Hobby Hotline, I echo your words, Jeremy. He's part of us. And we now are missing a part of us.
Great. Thank you, Rich. Ryan, welcome to the show. I believe this is your second time hosting on Hobby Hotline, and with episode number 2 for you, number 101 for our group overall. We're kicking it off with a heavy topic. Anything that you'd like to say?
No, someone passing away is always really sad. I don't really know Chris that well. I mean, I've seen some interviews, but that's about the extent of it. So condolences to his family. Sorry he has to deal with all that.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate that. I'm going to just put this up here right now. It's going to block off some of us, but this is Chris's post from yesterday. Picture of him and his brother. You can see they were very close. They were both involved in sports. John worked with Jimmy Kimmel Live, and Chris credits John for getting him involved in sports and the business of sports, and I believe even being a fan and a passionate sports fan. So again, our hearts go out to the family. We know that it's going to be a tough time for our brother Chris, and even the Upper Deck family as well. So with that, let's move on to our next topic, hobby-wise, and also a happy Thanksgiving to everybody out there in Hobbyland. It's funny, you go from a heavy topic to a happy Thanksgiving, even though it's a couple days ago now, but hope everybody who was able to did enjoy the holiday. And Rich, why don't we start talking? There's a couple things going on over at Panini right now. Something on the topic of NFTs, and then something a little bit that I hadn't heard of that you just surprised me of before we went live. Why don't you kick it off with those topics?
Okay, there's a long post on LinkedIn that we did not read through totally, and so we just want to give you full disclosure on that Panini is introducing NFTs for just about all their football products. And I'm not a person that knows very much about NFTs. I stay out of the NFT world, but it's a major move for Panini. They had been doing baseball. Now they're doing, I believe they had done baseball, maybe basketball, and now they've added football to the NFT world. And that's a major development because as NFTs develop, it's going to be very important to the hobby as part of the growth of getting people in a different way. We're used to tangible cards. There's other ways to get people into the hobby that aren't tangible cards. That's one of them. And, I'd rather hear your opinions on NFTs because I like to say, I don't know enough about them.
Yeah.
And the other I actually do know something about is a very nice man from England named Greg Lansdowne today is publication day, or it may have been yesterday, about his second book about Panini. This one is like a history of Panini stickers going all the way back. And I know Greg and I have sent emails back and forth for years about various things that have come on in this country. And actually today, Dr. Beckett interviewed him for his podcast. So if you want to hear a really cool interview, we can plug Dr. James Beckett's Beckett Insights podcast, and you can hear Greg Lansdowne talking about some of the history of Panini stickers. And they go back 60 years. We think about Panini stickers from what we usually know, which is when they began baseball in the 80s and hockey in the 80s. They go back to the 60s. And some of those 60s stickers are going to be really hard to find in any condition.
That's right. And the music stickers, I grew up in the 80s collecting the hockey sticker books, and every weekend it was all about filling in those little frames in the book, and how exciting that was as a kid. You just mentioned though, Rich, that it's his second book on Panini. What was the first one?
The first one was like a history of his collecting the items. But because Panini was so important to collecting stickers, there's a lot of really cool history about Panini in his first book too. And somewhere at home, I have a copy of the first book he was nice enough to get for me back in the day. And it's a really good read. So having read the first book, I will verify if the first book was a good read, the second book is going to be a good read. And
I can
find out how to get it.
Ryan is smiling. I can see Ryan actually just opened up another window so he could go look to purchase these books. I'm thinking the same thing. I want to buy both these books and read them and learn more about the history of Panini.
I'm on my phone right now, so I'm at home. So I'm writing down all these notes. Like, all right, time to buy that book and read it.
Right, exactly. Want to let everybody know who's watching and in the chat. We've got the link on the ticker right now. If you'd like to call in, join us for a few moments, please feel free to enter that link into your web browser or your phone browser, and you will be zipped right into the studio, and we can bring you on for questions, comments, tribute comments, whatever it is that you would like to do. As for the NFTs, Rich, that you just mentioned, you said you don't know much about them. I admit I don't know much about them either. I always find it interesting though that in hobby content and Instagram posts and just fellow hobbyists having conversations together, it seems like people think that just because you collect cards, it's almost just assumed that you either have to care about or you might consider collecting NFTs. And I have nothing against NFTs. They don't really interest me that much yet. They may one day. But just because we collect sports cards doesn't mean that we necessarily have to collect NFTs. Just because we collect sports cards doesn't necessarily mean that we collect Barbie dolls or Beanie Babies or Cabbage Patch Kids or spoons or whatever it is, right? They're just another collector class, I would say. Ryan, what do you how do you see NFTs within your own hobbying and overall?
Yeah, I think the NFTs really help the young 20-year-olds and teens that are getting into the hobby because people are growing up with this type of stuff and they're really interested in it. I mean, a lot of people my age are trying to learn as much as they can about NFTs and flip them, kind of like how older people flip cards. And there's younger people obviously flip cards as well. But I think that whole culture of people flipping NFTs, if they get into the sports side of things, which Panini's doing that, Topps is doing that as well. I don't know, is Upper Deck doing that as well with NFTs? I know they have e-packs, but
I think so. But even if not, I'm sure they'll be in soon.
Yeah. So if you're getting the younger people into the hobby, which is always a good thing, it brings new ideas to the hobby as well. And I kind of enjoy it, that side of things.
Yeah. And Ryan, you're a traditional collector.
I am. I prefer having the physical card rather than NFT. What I do wish, though, is some of these companies would have kind of both. Like if you hit a specific NFT in a pack, then you could redeem the physical card as well. And you could have the NFT and the physical card. So then you could cater to both sides of things. You'd have the NFT people that also would start getting some of the physical cards, the physical side people that go after the NFTs and kind of combine both audiences. But I haven't seen that happen yet.
Yeah, I think, part of what I was saying before, like in that, why do we seem to assume that as the sports card hobby, we need to give so much attention to NFTs? And I guess it's because the card companies are giving attention to NFTs and creating divisions and products for that they're going to target to their existing customers, sports card collectors. So it's almost like, and I don't mean this in any negative way, but like, does anyone feel, and I put this out to you guys and the chat, but does it feel like the card companies are almost setting us up for them to shove it down our throat and say, hey, you've been buying sports cards all these years, now come on and buy this new NFT product from us, especially since I believe, after their initial setup, there's not a lot of incremental cost to producing another NFT, whether you produce 50 copies of a certain NFT or 300. You saw it with Top Shot. They had some that were out of 75, some that were out of 7,500. It doesn't seem to be much of an incremental cost there. So any thoughts on that, guys, and to the chat in terms of card companies prepping us for what might be to come as far as their marketing strategy goes?
I have a business related question on this, and I do not know the answer. And believe it or not, I always like to say it when I don't know the answer. But we know that Fanatics is taking over the production of physical cards. Can switching to NFTs be a way for the existing card companies to keep producing sports related items? Was that covered in the new agreement? If not, then you may want to transition your company to doing NFTs as a way of generating income at what's probably a much lower cost.
Yeah.
So and that opens up another question, but on the NFT side of things, there is a cost, the mint each one. There's a gas fee associated with it, depending on the blockchain. I'm not a full expert on what blockchain each of these are based off of, whether it's Ethereum or Cardano or any of these other cryptos that are currently accepting NFTs. So there's some fixed cost with that. But I think the reason why all of them are jumping there is just because they're so hot. You see artists that are creating NFTs overnight and selling millions of dollars worth of NFTs. People are buying them up. So the card companies look at it as an additional source of revenue coming through. And if the people from the cards buy it, great. If not, they know they'll be able to sell it to the NFT crowd. They just hype it up.
Yeah, well said. Good points, both.
But I do want to add on what Rich was talking about, how possibly pivoting to NFTs. One thing I think a lot of the card companies are going to continue to do is pivot to smaller sports or other leagues. We saw Topps do that with Japanese baseball. They signed them on recently. It'd be interesting to see if someone tries to sign on, like, what's the league in Europe for basketball? I don't know what it's called. There's like another league over there as well.
The European League.
I guess it's called European League, but sign on these different smaller leagues like Korean baseball as well and continue to build out sports cards, but just not for the main American brands.
Yeah.
I mean, and you saw Panini signed MMA, got the MMA group to a license. They did that at the last industry summit. So that's a few months ago. The card companies are looking for, Topps and Panini are looking for other forms of keeping to generate income. And that's something, that's something to remember, is that I try to always look at stuff on a business level. And you want to stay in business, if you're not going to have a baseball license, you got to come up with your money other ways to keep a certain, at least X amount of your employees employed. Otherwise, you'll end up being a sole proprietor if you so desire.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Good point. Good point. Okay, fellas, let's move along here. I do want to shift and focus on the comments that have come through from everybody in the chat. And again, welcome everybody to Hobby Hotline. If you would like to join us on the screen, share a comment, a thought, an idea, even a tribute, as today's a bit of a special day. Not a bit, but it is. Feel free to enter the URL that is in the ticker right now into your browser. And again, that will zip you right on to into the backstage, and we will bring you on. I don't know if you guys received this or not, but I received an email this morning. It came from Golden Auctions. It was basically, we're at the end of the year here. We're coming up on December, and it's time for a lot of year in review sort of things. And this isn't a year in review episode per se, but I do want to sort of share what the email that came from Ken and his team today. Found it really interesting. And just to remind us of just how strong the year was. We often throughout any calendar year in the hobby, there's the narrative changes from it can be one day to the next, week, month. We all observe and see this, and whether the hobby is strong or it's weak at any certain time. But if you look at 2021 as a whole, the 11 months that we've had so far, I think most people would agree that it was a strong year in the hobby. And you guys, I don't know if you'll remember, I'm sure you will, it's not that long ago, but at the end of 2020, a topic in hobby content was what's going to happen in 2021. A lot of people were predicting the biggest year ever in the hobby in 2021. I think that came to be, if you look back. So I'm just going to share the screen here and scroll through a few of the records that the Golden Auction set this year. I haven't seen anything like this from any of the other auction houses, and if we had, I would definitely share them as well. But let's just do that right now. So this is the email from Golden Auctions. These are the basketball, the Hoops Legends record breakers, and celebrating an epic year at Golden, highlighting their favorite record-breaking sales from 2021. The LeBron James Exquisite RPA. This one's numbered 23 of 99, so his jersey number sold for $2.4 million in a BGS 8.5 holder. Definitely a noteworthy sale. The second one we had was the first ever Michael Jordan jersey autograph card, numbered out of 23, $2.7 million. Now, what I find interesting with this one, guys, is that this is not the best jersey auto card possible. First of all, the autograph is graded an 8, which is really, if you think about it, it's pretty low for an autograph grade on a card. The card itself is only graded an 8. Again, not your ideal grade. But it's neither is it the 23 of 23. So Ryan, I'll put this question to you. If this card was graded a BGS 9 or 9.5 with a 10 auto and was 23 of 23, what would that 2.7 million have been? Take a guess.
I'd probably guess 6 million or so. When you get the cards that expensive as well, I mean, there's such a limited amount of buyers. It's not like a card that the general public can go out and bid on. But again, it's a one-of-a-kind card as well. So someone bids $6 million, person bids 7, it could create a bidding war. I mean, we hear theories what the Mickey Mantle PSA 1952 Mantle PSA 10 would go for. People assume, 20 million plus in auction, but we really don't know. All it takes is 2 people with deep pockets, and they keep bidding it up.
Yeah, good point. Good.
And don't forget, it's not just 2 people nowadays with deep pockets. You have people like you do, Jeremy. I assume you still do some work for Collectible. You have groups like that fractionalize the cards. So you actually have a wider market of people who can afford this card. Some are going to keep it for themselves. Some are going to fractionalize it. And anytime you can make the market wider for the high dollar cards, you can increase the interest in it. So I agree with Ryan. It would be more than 2.7. I don't know if 6, but a 23-23 that's a 9-10, I think we're talking a lot more money.
Yeah, I think I'm with you, Ryan. I'm in that. I think you'd see 5 million plus. Now, it's the kind of card where it doesn't, the grade isn't as important. It's about the importance of the card itself and what it represents. The first ever jersey auto, Michael Jordan playing days card, super limited at 23 copies. So, but 8.8 is a low grade for a modern card. I still consider 97 to be modern. I heard someone refer earlier this week on another YouTube program to a card from 1991 as vintage, which I'm not going to argue with that because I actually consider up to 89 to be vintage. So 2 years, what's the big deal? But as far as 97 goes, definitely a modern day card to me. I could see 5 million plus, but the key thing here, or I won't say the key thing, an important thing to note, I believe, is that now that this comp has been set at 2.7, there's now a baseline for when a 9.5-10 does appear, whether it's a 23-23 or not. So, now it'll be up to the hobby to decide what sort of premium to place on the higher grade. And I would think if a 9.5-10 came up, it's easily going to hit $5 million. Logan Ward agrees. He says maybe $5 million.
Do we know if there's any 9.5-10s? I know someone on the thicker cards, it's really hard to get that type of grade just because of chipping.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I do know that the early jersey cards it's funny you say thicker. They were thinner than a normal card back in those days. They were the
Really?
thinnest card. Yeah, the 96 Upper Deck jersey cards in hockey are the thinnest cards I've ever seen. They're almost paper thin. So because they put the extra layer to seal in the jersey on top, but it didn't cover the top of the whole card. It wasn't like you had the full 8 1/4 square inches covering it. So it was pretty, they were very, very thin, extremely fragile, which likely explains part of the low grade on the card itself. But let's look at the next one. It's the 1980 Topps rookie of Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, famous iconic card, one of the most important cards in the hobby, I would say. PSA 10 sold for $840,000. Kind of funny to think that $840,000 doesn't seem like a lot of money for a card of this importance anymore, right? Rich, how do these numbers, when you see these numbers, Rich, a guy who's been in the hobby as long as you have, I mean, I think you've even been in the hobby longer than our resident old man John Newman, self-proclaimed.
I did my first show the year John Newman bought his first pack with the 79 Reggie Jackson. That was the first show I ever set up at, and people were throwing money at me because I was probably way too cheap. Because I bought cheap, I sold cheap. And I remember it was a big deal in 1980 when Rob Cohen of R&B Coins spent $9,000 to buy 3 52 Topps Mickey Mantles at the Willow Grove Card Show in a public auction, and we thought he had probably lost his mind. Well, those $3,000 mantles are, I don't want to know, but they're worth a lot more today. If whoever he sold them to, if they still have them, can cash in now and do really well. So thinking about these numbers, it's nice to see the hobby grow, and it's nice to see the big dollars, and it's also nice to know, but there's still a place for dime quarter cards. When I did Kyle's last show, and and I'm going to throw a little publicity. He came in for the last of Kyle's show, so the only thing I could bring in were my quarter cards because I wanted to be able to go away from my table. I didn't want to sit at my, be stuck at my table because of the way it's set up. It's a kind of a convoluted setup at times at Kyle's show. There's a separate room. Ryan can attest to how it's set up. And I was in not the main room, but the Starlight room, which is a nice show by itself, but totally different vibe than the main room. And so I needed to be able to get up and walk around and walk away. And I brought my quarter boxes. And I did okay. But there's room at a show for quarter boxes, and there's room at Kyle's show, for example, for the hundreds of $1,000 cards. So we have to remember there's room for both. And I don't mind. It brings more interest to the hobby. I mean, the problem is sometimes you have people thinking their cards are worth that much money. But in terms of general hobby, if it brings people in, I'm in favor of it.
Okay, good stuff. Ryan, I want to ask a question to you, sort of based on what Rich was just saying about the shows. You are the guy who's been to like 685 card shows this year already. I exaggerate. I think you said you've been to 49 maybe by now. But my question: you're at all these shows. How often do you see people go up to a vendor with their cards that they are hoping they've hit a gold mine, and you have to sit there and you're kind of like you get uncomfortable too because you just feel bad for the situation. But how often do you watch that vendor have to explain to the attendee of the show that their cards just aren't really worth anything because they're junk wax era commons?
I've had a few different variations of that. So even tabling at a local show, which I table every once in a while, people will come by with junk wax and try to sell it off, and it's like, I don't have any interest in it. If I had quarter boxes, dollar boxes, maybe, but I just can't really move it. So it does happen quite a bit, and I know other people deal with it as well. But the big thing, what I've been seeing happening recently, is people coming in with their cards, let's say basketball cards they bought in March, and still trying to get full comps. They'll be like, oh, I paid $1,800 for this back in earlier this year, so I'm kind of looking for like $1,500-$1,600, but the card's now $600 or $700. So they're still expecting the high comp from earlier this year, what they paid, and trying to unload it at that same price. But you can't pay that much because you could buy them on eBay or MySlabs or any other marketplace for 1/3 the cost.
Right. Yeah. Good point. Good point. Okay, let's go to the final record breaker from the email that I and I'm sure many people received from Ken and Golden Auctions today. The 1996 Kobe Bryant Topps Chrome Refractor Black Label. I've deliberately hid the price. I'm going to scroll up to it in a moment. I like how right here it says this exact card last publicly sold for $58,000 in March of 2016. $58,000 to, drum roll please, $1.752 million. So basically $1.7 million higher than the last time this exact card had sold, I believe. Just an amazing price for a card that is not that rare. What's rare is that black label. So, Ryan, I'm going to put this question to you because, you're pretty, you've got your finger on the pulse of the whole hobby from cricket cards from the 1800s to modern day cards like this and even more and ultra modern. How much of the value do you think this card is attributed to that to the holder itself? We always say the hobby often says buy the card, not the grade. I recently heard someone say buy the grade, not the card, a very experienced collector who competes on the PSA set registry. This is obviously BGS card. How much hype is there around black labels from what you see out there?
Oh, so much. I mean, you just see the multipliers at shows when people have a black label, even if it's like a $5 or $10 card, you put the black label on it and it goes for a ton more money. I think a lot of the newer collectors just focus on the grade because they're not assessing their cards themselves. And we're kind of changing that mindset of buying the card, not the grade. And now people are looking at buying the grade, not the card itself, especially with how many cards people are submitting to the companies nowadays on the modern side of things. People are just looking at 10s, 9s, 8s. They aren't going to inspect those cards. They just expect automatically whatever grading company gives the card, they're going to go with it. And a lot of new money's going into the hobby, and they're going to spend that on that Kobe Bryant. Especially, I don't know the pop on the black Kobe Bryant refractors, but if that's the only one out there, that might be the finest example in the world. Again, bidding war between multiple parties, and that's why we got that evaluation on that card.
Yeah.
I just want to say that's a 30x multiplier in just a few years. And if we could all make 30x on our cards, we all could not have jobs tomorrow and just say, I'm cashing it in for now and say sayonara, good night to whatever jobs we have and just enjoy life for a few years. And then we start buying again because it's too much fun not to.
Rich, a few minutes ago, you made the comment that, that the gentleman you referenced, whose name escapes me, bought those Mickey Mantles for $9,000. Everyone thought he was crazy, and now he looks like a genius. Is it possible, guys, that we are in that situation again where people who are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions on some of these rare cards of iconic, legendary players who will never, ever be forgotten? Is it possible that they're making the best investments of their lives? You referenced, Rich, a 30x multiple in a relatively short period of time, 5 years. I mean, it's crazy to think or to even fantasize that maybe those returns are available again based on prices in 2021. I don't think anybody thinks they are. Let me just be clear about that. But is it possible? We've got Fanatics coming in and their marketing prowess and potential to blow the hobby up, to make it truly mainstream, where every sports fan who's ever bought a jersey or a baseball cap could potentially be, we could now say every sports fan who has a jersey, every sports fan has a ball cap, and every sports fan collects cards. If we get to that point in time, are we still in the early days in terms of possible future returns? I'll put that out in the open to both of you guys. What do you think?
Well,
what if I say yes and no?
Expand on that, please, Rich.
Okay, yes, it's possible. I used to say in my early days at Beckett, when we were shipping out 1 million baseball magazines a month and there was 25 million attendees to baseball, or 25 different million attendees. If you give me 10% of the attendees being collectors, that's 2.5 million, which is more than we're selling of Beckett magazines. So there was still growth, even where it seemed impossible at 1 million copies. The reason I'm saying yes and no is you can never underestimate the stupidity of what's going on in baseball. We have a potential lockout beginning within a week. And if they get it over reasonably soon and they get to their contracts, then it's a blip. But if it's, we lost the hockey season 15 years ago, and it took how long for hockey to recover in the collecting market? It took a while.
Well, yes and no. I want to do a yes and no, because what hockey had going for it in 2005, the lock after the 04-05 lockout, was two generational players stepped into the league at the exact same time, being Sidney Crosby and Alexander Ovechkin. And Upper Deck brought out the cup, and we had all these wonderful new brands. So it actually, that was one of the strongest years. But I think as far as hockey overall, some would argue it's never recovered, because some people, it's not even on their radar. But that's another sort of topic,
right? And so the hobby, it became even more focused. And I think you're absolutely right, especially with, there were arguments for many years, who's better, Ovechkin or Crosby? Crosby's got more cups. I think he's got more Olympic gold medals. So on those levels, he's better. Ovechkin's got a shot at the all-time goals record. And I don't think
last
he's
night
got a shot at the all-time points record. So on that level, we'll give it to Ovechkin by a little in today's world. But overall, it's still a push if you look at certain criteria. But you're right, the interest in hockey. ESPN finally got a hockey license back. And I know my wife and mother-in-law were complaining yesterday. General Hospital, which they watch religiously, was preempted for a hockey game, and they're complaining at me. And I'm thinking, oh, wait a second, ESPN just has a license. Yay, hockey! I don't have to hear about General Hospital. So thank you, ESPN, for that. But hockey's done a really good job. The Winter Classic, the January 1st games, they're awesome. They're played outdoors. They're absolutely awesome. Hockey's done a good job of getting back. But having lived through the 94-95 baseball strike and seeing what that did to the hobby, I'm concerned, because baseball is still a fulcrum. You see more baseball cards at the show than the other sports. Yeah. We'll adjust. We'll put basketball. We'll put hockey out. We'll put vintage baseball out. But I saw what happened the last time, and I'm concerned. And if it's a quick thing and it's over by February, while all the sports, the football and hockey are in season and everything else is going on, it's a blip. If it goes to June, July, I'm worried. We gave everybody in 2020 gave baseball a pass, because what went on with COVID was unprecedented. As a matter of fact, if Ryan's a history buff, one of the greatest hockey players of all time, Joe Hall, lost his life in the 1919 pandemic up in Canada. And, people still remember that and mourn that. And speaking of pandemic, I noticed in the chat, our good friend James, Elite Hunters, has recovered from COVID himself. And we're really glad to see, James, you're feeling so much better. I know I saw you just before you came down with it. And that is a brutal thing to go through. So that's why I say yes and no. There's some history involved too.
Ryan?
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about the CBA with baseball right now. I do think it's moving forward, and there's a lot that we aren't hearing behind the scenes, especially with the Rays signing Wander Franco to that long contract. I know one thing a lot of the players and agents have been grieving about is young players not signing on bigger contracts, especially since recently a lot of the data came out that players when they're signed in their 30s aren't performing as well as players when they're signed on 22, 23, 24 years old. And there needs to be some sort of balance. And the Rays, they're my team, but they're always really, really frugal. They do not want to spend money on anyone. And the fact that he just signed Wander Franco to a $200 million contract, largest in our history by a long shot. I know Franco's really good, but there's something behind the scenes that I think is going to be changing with the early 20-year-olds. And Rays are getting above the curve and trying to sign them early on. So I think the CBA will get cleared by the time spring training comes around. It has to happen, especially after the COVID year. Now, the expansion of the hobby and where we're currently at, and if these prices are going to continue to rise, I kind of see, I hate to say it, but I still think we're in that early stages of how social media has developed this hobby and kind of building out a worldwide global audience. And I think Fanatics sees that as well. mean, if you even look at like the YouTube side of things and all the creators on there, there's a few over 100,000, but that's it. If you look at other markets, even like Pokemon, there's creators over 1 million subscribers on that side of things. And sports all around the globe is much bigger audience, bigger reach than Pokemon is. So I still think there's room to expand on that side of things. And what I was talking about a little bit earlier with the card companies now going over to Japan to create baseball cards, and if they want to continue to build out other leagues, I think the expansion over to Asia and Europe has to happen. And we've seen how soccer cards have just exploded in the last 2-3 years in general. And if we could continue with that European audience, the Asian audience, I mean, prices have to go up in some extent.
Well, Ryan, one thing about the Rays is I believe a decade or so ago, they signed Evan Longoria to that 10-year contract. I mean, he ended up with the Giants, I think, at the end of the contract.
He did.
He was a little bit older, but the Rays have always made it a point with what they consider their generational player to try to lock them to a longer-term contract. So this is only the second time they've done that. But, I want to say they're frugal, but they're careful. It's worth it to them. And I think everybody and for people who think that Wander Franco left money on the table, that's generational wealth for several generations to come. It's kind of hard at the age of 20 to turn down generational wealth. And some people bet on themselves. And yet I think about Jose Fernandez, who was going to bet on himself and got killed in that horrible boating accident. And I don't know how much they collected in insurance, but it was nowhere near what his contract would have been had he signed a long-term extension that would have been fully insured. So there are some practical reasons to sign long-term contracts like that. People complained about Acuna's, people said, Acuna's gave his contract out too cheaply. He tore his ACL. It looks like he'll be fine, but what if he's not? He still has the money. So I'm okay with both sides of that discussion. But if you get generational wealth, it's kind of hard to turn it down.
For sure. I think we can all agree to that. All right, guys, we are 40 minutes in, and I want to take a minute and just sort of go through some of the comments and welcome people to the show 40 minutes into it. We'll start with Rex and the shop at Moco. So good morning to all of you guys out there. We got Foul 5 Ball. Logan Ward is here with us. Expresses his prayers to Chris Carlin and family, as does John from Sports Card Nation. Both John and Logan, obviously fellow Hobby Hotline hosts. And we'll just take this moment to it's one thing to dedicate an episode to a family and their loss at the beginning of the episode, but I think it's important that we revisit that right now and just again all think about the Carlin family, the Upper Deck family, John Carlin himself, who was lost yesterday to ALS, and I know that the whole family is going through a difficult time, and really to anybody out there as well who's lost a sibling before their time, John Newman included. I lost my younger brother in early 2020, and so to anybody out there who's lost a loved one, I just want to take a moment and just let you know that we as and I almost on behalf of the hobby, if I can be so bold as to say, on behalf of the hobby, we often get caught up in the activity of the hobby. And, but I think the hobby is actually pretty good at recognizing that we are human and we have families and we do experience tragedies, and there are sad events that go on, loss. So, on behalf of the hobby and for the hobby, hearts go out and condolences to the Carlins and anyone else who's lost a sibling. Not that I'm going to say to myself, but definitely to John Newman, who experienced that earlier this year, and anyone else out there who has. So let's just take a second for that. Continuing through the comments, Logan says, I can spell NFT. I think he's saying that's the extent of his understanding of NFTs. We have Elite Hunters, who's been active in the chat. Good morning and welcome. Canton is missing Brad, Texas Card Dude, who's in Dallas right now, says John. Daniel Busby piped up and said he has a question. He has a lot of modern NBA and NFL slab cards of the big name guys. He's wanting to get into vintage. Would it be better to sell his slabs or trade to get vintage? I think this is a great question for Ryan to address, because Ryan is very active in the hobby, at shows, through his content. So Ryan, why don't you take a second and give Daniel a bit of advice?
Yeah, so Daniel, if you're going to a card show, what I'd recommend is looking for a seller that has pretty much all modern cards and then one vintage or a few vintage slabs. And the reason is they dabble in both modern and vintage, or maybe they took on the vintage cards on a trade and they just want to liquidate those. So if you notice the seller has a few vintage cards that you like and has predominantly all modern, go in there and trade your modern cards for the vintage, because they're more likely to go out there and trade it with you. Now, on the flip side, if you see someone having all vintage and a few modern cards, this is someone you do not want to trade with, because they value their vintage cards a lot higher than modern cards. A lot of vintage collectors want to hold on to their vintage and just flip modern cards to buy more vintage cards. I'm on that side of things. I'd rather just have vintage than modern. Also, the option of selling your cards. Personally, if you sell off your slabs right now, I'd go and try to get only one or two pieces, try to get a higher quality piece rather than buying a few lower graded cards, because those high quality pieces are always going to attain more value and increase in value a lot faster than a lower grade card.
Rich, isn't this guy impressive? I mean, I put out this question for him. He really had no setup, no heads up that he was going to get this. And without missing a beat, he comes up with some really good advice for Daniel. Rich, what about this guy, Ryan?
Well, I will say something. I was talking before, one day before the National, with Mike Moynihan, excuse me, and one of his friends. And we were talking, and he goes, well, the hobby needs more people like Ryan. And I was talking about Ryan without mentioning him by name, and they both knew immediately who I was referring to.
Yeah.
One of the things is Ryan is well grounded on both vintage and new. He knows the new card market and he knows the vintage card market. And he parlays his new card market to buy things for his collection or things he may think are undervalued in the vintage card market. And there really are such things, by the way. It's good to know both markets, and it's hard to know both markets. But that's a very good point about look for the outliers. People come to my table and they see a whole bunch of vintage cards. And even though I have new cards at my table, they'll go, you're a vintage guy. Well, I am a vintage guy, but I have new cards. I don't know. I mean, I do not know as much about the brand new basketball market, but I know something. But I don't know what's going on in the basketball card world. I don't know what's going on as much in hockey. I follow it. I have working knowledge. Ryan has knowledge of both new and old, and it really helps him walking around the show. He gets a different knowledge. And, there are people out there who say you make more money doing what he does than if you do when you're sitting behind a table.
Right. And I think it's a credit to Ryan and people like Ryan who are interested. You have to be interested and curious about things to be able to really absorb and then share the knowledge that you gain. So that was great, Ryan. Good. Really. I just like how quick you didn't have to pause. You right away knew what to say to that question. A credit to you, my friend. Good job. Let's say hello to Hobby Champs, who's with us as well today. Elite Hunters, glad to hear that you are feeling better from COVID. Definitely. Logan Ward says, I like Panini cycling and racing stickers from the 60s. So again, just so everybody knows, we are now kind of reviewing the episode so far and going back in time to the comments because we hadn't really addressed them up until now.
And those Ali stickers are so expensive too in the 60s.
And I'm sure the Pele stickers from the 60s are through the roof. And if you ever get a well-graded Pele sticker from the 60s, it's, we're talking about those hundreds of thousands of dollars. You can have one of those too.
Exactly. Very popular.
The scary thing is about those stickers, someone probably has it in their attic in Europe or elsewhere and don't even know it's worth that much money.
John Newman says, speaking about NFTs earlier, I have below zero interest in NFTs. Logan Ward likes touchy-feely cards. Speaking again to tangible versus intangible. Hobby Champ says, I believe the high-end NFT market is 100% fake. I don't believe those mega sales are legitimate sales. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a take and something that I don't think Hobby Champs is alone in that assessment, although I don't know whether it's true or not. Okay, let's keep on going here. John says, I have an NFT house for sale in the winter. It's really, really cold. I mean, I just saw something the other day that a plot of land in the metaverse sold for like $2 million. So speaking of selling air, or Florida swampland, I suppose. Interesting stuff for sure. Hobby Champ says Topps Bunt was a monumental failure. NFTs are essentially the same thing other than increased functionality. Still pretty much the same thing, though. NFT values will eventually fall so hard. Maybe not. If people want, the argument that I hear often for NFTs is that it's what the future, it's what the young people want. And they, oftentimes people, Gary Vee specifically, will say, if you've ever bought a skin in Fortnite or any of these other games, you're buying an NFT. And people, they like that. They like the status that comes along with having that intangible or that digital asset. Ryan, something you want to jump in with?
Yeah, I was gonna say that's absolutely right with the skin side of things. I mean, growing up, I played a little bit of video games here or there, and people were, even like when I was in my teens, people would try to spend hundreds of dollars on a skin for a game that's outdated within 1 year. And then there's a whole CSGO market of skins as well, which were reaching thousands and thousands of dollars. On the NFT side of things, I think like some artists build out videos, and you can't really replicate that on a canvas. You can't really build out 3D art. Whereas online, you can have that video clip, which is technically yours. On that side of things, I think they're valid. Some of the other things, which are like stick figures, which there's no really art on it, and people are trying to pump those, I don't like that type of thing. But there are NFTs that have functionalities on them as well as perks, and that could also go really well in the future. But what I've been seeing also is a lot of these NFT companies or NFT producers are lying about the perks and never following through with those. And people are buying so many NFTs, they don't really monitor the perks if everyone's following through with all their promises. So that's something also that's going to be there in the future.
That's a really good point, right? That people might not be able to stay on top of them all. As far as the perks go, for me, it would be like, I'm buying the perk. I got an NFT, which is my claim for the perk, but really all I care about is the perk. I want to go on to this comment here from Canton Card Collector. Says, some people are saying the card flip game is dead. Do you believe this is true? I'm going to start this one off and say, I absolutely do not believe this is true. It may be more challenging now, and the strong will survive. The savvy will survive, will be successful. The card flip game has never been dead. I don't think it will ever die. Gentlemen, Rich, you work at ComC, which from the beginning of time has promoted flipping on their platform as something that they were encouraging and wanted to see. And people you always see people, kind of flexing their ComC flips on social media. What's the thoughts at ComC? One of the
I don't know the thoughts at ComC. I'm 2,000 miles away.
Right. But
I agree with you 100%, Jeremy. The card flip game, and Ryan's another one, and he probably does some of it too, is that he finds out what people want, and okay, so-and-so wants this card, I'll buy it from him and sell it to him or sell it to her. That will never go away, but you're absolutely right. You have to be more savvy. It's not the beginning of the year anymore where you bought a card in 3 days and 3 seconds later, oh, I'll buy that card from you for a profit. Now you have to look for who's popular or what the grade is or know what the comps are or know what. I have a friend of mine, he walks around the Dallas Card Show. He spends thousands of dollars at the Dallas Card Show very successfully buying old and new. He just looks at eBay comps and knows what he can pay, knows what he can sell for, and he never has trouble buying cards at the Dallas Card Show. He comes in for everyone. He has spent upwards, I don't want to say how much, but he has spent upwards of tens of thousands of dollars at those shows. And for a while, he was the only one. Now there are plenty of others. But there's a market. There's always a market. I don't know certain things you would know. I certainly don't know anywhere near what you know about hockey. You might know somebody. I may be basing it on a book price. I don't have time to look up every single card on eBay. I may have that card for $20, and you may say, wait a second, I can get $50. Let me buy it from you, and I'll sell it immediately. So that market always exists. There's always cards to buy at any level, from a dime to hundreds of dollars.
Right. There's also always that regional arbitrage, especially today with a guy like Ryan going from show to show. Ryan's in a great position to say, well, I know the dealers at every single show in America. So, Ryan, there's big opportunity for guys like you who travel to say, well, yeah, I can buy it in Chicago for $20 and sell it in Miami for $80 or $60 or $50, whatever it might be. So how about your take on the flip game? I mean, when people say the flip game is dead, I think that those people just aren't good at it. That's really what that would be my initial assumption, that they just either they're not very good at it, or they just don't have the resources or the reach that someone like yourself might have in terms of reach. Ryan, what do you say to this?
I'd say it's about 90% correct. Where I think the people are saying the flip game is dead is on mostly modern basketball side of things. We know like a year, 2 years ago, you could buy any basketball card. The guy shoots, I don't know, 30 points in a game, and the card price doubles a week later, and they're selling cards and they're flipping it. A lot of the shoe culture people came in, hyped up the card, flip it, flip, 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 flip. And on that side of things, where you could flip base prism cards and make $20, $30 on a player, that is dead. People don't care about the base cards anymore. I mean, you really shouldn't when you look at the print runs of some of these prism cards when they're 30, 40,000 graded alone. We're talking about junk wax era type things. But flip game is 100% there. Like Rich was talking about. I mean, I think you're talking about what, Rohan, or was there someone else that you were talking about? Because Rohan does the same thing, just like going around. There's a lot of people going around shows and will just keep flipping the entire show and not even keep cards for their own PC. There's a YouTuber, Roth Cards, that does that. All he does is flip. He doesn't even collect cards. He goes there, finds opportunities on the modern side of things, and just makes money going and flipping cards. And there's opportunities there. You have to learn a market, learn the ins and outs of that market, and then start expanding your knowledge to other markets as well. So when you see something from another sport, you know what that is. But until you master one sport, you shouldn't be going out there and doing that.
And you have, Ryan, when you talk about base cards, you have a product like Upper Deck, basic Upper Deck hockey. The most expensive cards are the Young Guns.
Yep.
The best Young Guns, and those are base cards. So we can't just generalize base cards, because you give me a base card of an Elias Pettersson, that's a pretty darn good card.
Jeremy, are those short print though, the Young Guns a little bit?
Are they what? Sorry?
Are they short prints though, or are they like the same print run as everything else?
I believe they are short print relative to a standard base card. You know, they're kind of like a subset within the overall set, but they're numbered within the overall set. But they are short printed compared to, you know, a veteran base card. I think you get 6 Young Guns in every box.
So yeah, they're one every 4 packs.
Yeah.
And I remember a couple years ago, I don't even want to ask Jeremy what it went for, but I think I pulled an Austin Matthews or Young Gun, and I sold it immediately for $100 at the next show. Where is that card nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, raw at the Sport Card Expo in Toronto a couple weekends ago, where I was set up as a vendor, I had one in my showcase. I think I was asking 600 or 650 Canadian, so call it 500 US or so. That, you know, speaking of, you know, Young Guns, and we talked about Alexander Ovechkin a little bit earlier, but, you know, his Young Gun in a PSA 10 recently set its all-time high at just over, I think, $7,000 US. I remember you could buy those for $80 for a PSA 10 not that long ago. You know, we talked about, and Rich, you mentioned before how, you know, Ovechkin and Crosby, again, they came into the league in the exact same month, and in 2005, October 05. And now they were drafted in different years. Ovechkin was drafted first overall in 04, Crosby in 05, but we lost the 04-05 season. So they both came in the 05-06 season. And since then, they've always sort of been doing this as far as like who's worth more, because they've both had great success. Crosby won Stanley Cups much earlier than Ovechkin did. Ovechkin only won his first one a couple of years ago, but now he's on this charge to catch and beat Wayne Gretzky's all-time goals record. Ovechkin had a hat trick last night. For those who don't know, that means he scored 3 goals last night, which is he's 35 years old. He's having the best season of his career, which is just crazy. And I never thought he would be able to catch Gretzky's goals record. I think he will. But back to my point is that his Young Gun, which is really a commodity card, it's kind of like the card that everybody is aware of, but it's now selling for double what Crosby's was. And there was a time when I remember when Ovechkin's card first sold for more than Crosby's, and it's like, really? And he's Russian, and, you know, the hobby generally in hockey favors the Canadian-born players or the American-born, but not the Russian-born. And now, you know, he's kind of separated himself in value from Crosby as far as Young Guns goes, to a point where I don't know if or when Crosby will catch up until we're maybe, 10 years past their retirement, and you look at their whole body of work and you realize that Crosby's body of work is actually more impressive, career to date.
Well, but it's interesting you bring that up, because one of the great hobby comparisons is Mantle versus Mays. Now, I remember this because I did a project on this. The 51 Bowman Mantle, if you ever look at Dr. Beckett's first price guide book in 1979, the high price for a 51, and they're both in the same high number series in 51 Bowman, so it's a very valid comparison. The 51 Bowman Mantle was $90. The 51 Bowman Mays was $85, which on a statistical level is a dead heat. Today, the 51 Bowman Mantle far surpasses the 51 Bowman Mays. And you can make an argument. Mays was a better player than Mantle. He lasted longer. His career numbers are better. Mantle has the World Series because he had a better team. Mays was probably the better player and played in a tougher place to play for most of his career. So it's still at the time it was a statistical push. Today, not so much. And I don't think that will ever change. There are various reasons, including Mantle was a gregarious guy at the shows in the 80s and 90s while he was still able, and Mays was never quite as gregarious. In fact, he could be a little bit caustic to people. Mantle knew in public he could never be caustic, and it really helped, I believe. And so you've got that situation, and that's why I think Ovechkin's finishing kick will always keep him ahead of Crosby. But you're right. The overall thing will bring Crosby closer to Ovechkin eventually when people realize he's undervalued compared to Ovechkin.
Right. And of course, there's a lot of hype right now with his assault on Gretzky's goals record, which is a lot of fun. And I think you're going to see a lot of action on his card.
You got ESPN now behind the ESPN marketing machine.
And Ovechkin just signed this 5-year deal, which the general thought is that he signed it so that to give him 5 years to catch Gretzky's goals record. I want to bring up this comment from Rex. Says, you guys would love seeing what these kids in the shop are buying today. Randy Moss, Emmett Smith, Walter Payton, Peyton Manning. These kids are 8 to 9 years old. I do love seeing that, Rex. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. And then I want to go to this comment here from, first of all, Daniel Busby did thank Ryan for his great explanation and advice. And Canton Card Collector wants to know, Ryan, what card or cards are you chasing for the PC next, if you're willing to divulge?
I'm going to be general. I'm going to say I want to have a T206 Cobb in my collection, but I'm not going to talk about the niche cards because I don't want to have another situation with Cricket. Or I got 46 of the 50 Cricket top rookie cards, and then the last 4 spiked so much that I can't even afford them. So I've stopped giving out what I'm collecting and stopped posting it, as sad as it is, because my subscribers buy it up and then they show me like, hey, I just bought this card. Thanks for getting me into this.
Yes,
Ryan, if I ever find the Cricket card, you're welcome to it, because I couldn't care. So
Ryan, you're like, thanks for costing me more money. Thanks for running up the price on what I'm trying to buy.
Well,
I get it.
I'm not buying that many Crickets anymore. It's just like I put that off the side. I'm like, all right, if I see them at a show, I'll pick them up. If not, a few years down the road, I'll buy those cards. I have 46 of them. I'm pretty close on that. And I know one subscriber wants to end up giving me 2 when it comes over to the United States from the UK, which is really awesome of them.
Let's say good morning to Victor, the rookie card specialist, who recently rolled out his updated website. Good morning, Victor. Thank you.
Morning, Victor. Great seeing you in Chicago.
Yeah, I saw that in your video, Ryan. It was nice to see the Victor cameo on the breakaway video for sure.
And it was also nice to see the cameo by another of our Hobby Hotline hosts, 1 Million Cubs, Bo Spencer, who has his show today up in Madison, Wisconsin. So good luck, Bo.
Good luck to Bo. John says card flipping will never die, but it will be better sometimes than others. Yeah, that's a typical economy. Really makes good sense for sure. For sure. Nick Gable says, I hope flippers get stuck with their products. Well, thanks for the positive energy, Nick Gable.
But I understand where he's coming from on that. It is frustrating sometimes when you can't get the card you wanted because somebody bought them with the hope it went up, and all of a sudden you got stuck with them. And I get that. And then sometimes there's also greed. Hey, I should have made the money on that card, not you. So I get some of those comments, but you don't want to wish bad on anybody, but at some point, not everything goes up anymore. I mean, we've been through that before. I love the comment coming up about the guy with the 1,000 Greg Jeffries cards. How many of us in the 80s had Greg Jeffries cards? And I remember we sold at the absolute peak of the Greg Jeffries market when $88 first came out, and he was, quote, short printed, which means there's only a 750,000 cards of him compared to the million cards of every other $88. We sold Greg Jeffries cards for up to $10 in '88. I mean, that's a scary number.
Well, the one thing I'll say about flippers, which, the term itself seems to have such negative connotation, but for most collectors, we rely on the flippers to find us the cards that we want. A guy like Ryan, who is a collector, but also buys and sells to fund his PC and his travels, you're taking cards from one market to another. I take a lot of pride when I acquire a card, and say I purchase a collection from somebody, and I then take that card to a card show, and I can place it into I like to call it placing it into somebody's collection. Yes, I'm trading it for money or another card, but I take a lot of pride actually in finding that card a better home. So am I a flipper? Yeah, by definition, I have flipped that card for a profit. Do I want somebody to want me to get stuck with that card? No, I don't think that's a nice sentiment. But at the same time, I feel like I'm doing a service to the hobby. And likewise, when I find a card at somebody's booth or table, or from another hobbyist, a participant who bought that card for 20 and sells it to me for 40, I don't care that you made $20. You did me a service. You found that card that I want. So flippers are an integral part of the fabric of the hobby. And if they were to go away altogether, the hobby would not be nearly as exciting, and collectors would suffer. Well, because you wouldn't find the cards that you want as readily available.
Jeremy, I just interrupted you. I'm so sorry. Nick just posted an interesting comment about what he defined as a flipper, and I'd like you to highlight that.
Sure. Is this one right here?
Yes, sir.
I was talking about when someone goes into places like Walmart or Target and buys it out and then posts them online. Okay, so that's a completely different thing to Nick Gable, and I understand what you're saying. And yes, that's so I guess the term flipper, it depends. I perceived it as one thing, and I apologize to Nick Gable for not understanding his intention with the term. I still am glad we had the discussion about singles flipping, because I think it's important, but I understand the sentiment now much better. Thank you for clarifying, Nick. I do appreciate it.
And I also want to point out that if they get stuck with those boxes at they all thought they were going to sell it for 3 or 4 times. If you're sitting with the inventory and you spent the money, sometimes you're going to reduce your price anyway just to sell the thing. That's why you see clearances. So don't, just be patient. I know it's hard, but there'll be times where you will get the boxes. I mean, I went to Walmart last week, and granted, the only thing they had was Topps Archives blaster boxes. I wasn't caring. I didn't buy one. This week I may stop in and buy one if I so desire, or anything else they have, if they have any. But my point is that, you know what? The marketplace makes those decisions on the unopened boxes. Ryan, how many boxes do you see at the shows where the guys are trying to sell these unopened boxes, and the only activity, if there is any, is dealer to dealer? Oh, okay, I can sell that for more. But you don't see collectors walking out with those boxes at those prices, do you?
No, it's like there's so many people that sell the retail boxes at the show. At local shows, there's always at least 2 booths. At national shows, you don't see it as much because the booth space is more expensive, and those people that put on the shows, they kind of have their list of dealers that they want to have at the shows, and plus there's such a long wait list that these people can't go there. It's mostly on the local side of things.
Right, and as I said, the marketplace will make the correction. If you can't sell it, it'll get fixed. Yeah. And I want to point out the ultimate card flipper of all time was Alan Rosen.
Mr.
Alan Rosen, the most famous purchase he made were those 52 unopened packs, and he sold them to many people I knew in the the Northeast. And today they'd all be worth so much money, and you can tell a Rosen fine 52 high number when you see it. The average grade is probably between 8 and 9. There might be some 10s, there might be some 7s, but they're 8s to 9s. They're all worth a lot more than he bought them, but he flipped them because that's what he did. He bought and he sold. He bought and he sold. He's actually the ultimate flipper. And I mean, if he had an open product, he flipped it too. And yes, he is Mr. Man, but Alan was the ultimate flipper, and that's how we knew him. And yet Alan was remarkably fair. If he paid $1,000, it'd go to you to $1,100. He didn't gouge that. He worked on a percent.
Right on. John says, if you've ever bought a card or box and sold it later, you're a flipper. As a dealer, I'm a flipper. Yeah, the term itself just, it's just got that negative connotation. But again, I'm not a big fan of people who stake out the Walmarts to buy that retail wax to then mark it up and sell it, and in essence, really taking it away from children and the ability for a father and a son or a mother and a daughter to go into a card shop and buy, or a Walmart or a Target and buy these products and then open them and have fun. How many kids aren't going to have that ability on Christmas Day coming up here or Hanukkah this week and be able to do that because of these flippers that Nick was referring to earlier. And yeah, I don't think it's
forget the kids. I like going to Walmart with a $20 bill and buying it.
Forget
that. I just like to open it for $20.
Rich, forget the kids, he says.
I don't mean it that way.
I know you don't. I know. It's just funny.
I mean by not just, and I should have phrased it this way, not just the kids.
Not just the kids. Exactly.
Forget it's just about the kids. It's about everybody who can afford. We want the hobby to be affordable on all price levels.
Yeah.
And it's nice to walk in. And as I said, I'm seeing more showing up in the retail, in the retail element now. And so we are returning back to a sense of normalcy in that.
Foul 5 ball, Rich. Foul 5 ball says, I'm not a flipper, never sold a card, I collect only. Well, and that's an approach, right? But the question I would say is to Foul 5 ball, have you ever bought a card from a flipper or from a dealer? Because if you have, you recognize that they're an important part of the fabric of the hobby, right? Without everybody who sets up at a card show flips cards. It's just, right? It's just part of it. Even if you were a collector only at some point, you're probably going to have to move a few cards here or there, or your estate will do it for you at some point in time. So Elite says, Rich, is every man or child for himself? Him or herself?
To some extent, yes. I mean, it's kind of sad, but yes. I mean, you have to look out for yourself, James, but there's nothing wrong with having stuff available at all price points. James collects really good cards, and we like what James does. Ryan, you've stayed at his house.
Yeah, James is awesome.
Yes, he is. We all agree on that. But there's a price point for everybody. That's why I bring out the quarter boxes. But we've also talked about cards that are hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars today. The beauty of the hobby is there's still a price point for everybody. And something I used to say 30 years ago when I got interviewed, as part of my role in Beckett, was that the hobby is dynamic. It can change based on on-field performance. If Lamar Jackson throws for 7 touchdowns tomorrow, he's already high. It'll get higher. Of course, if he throws for 7 touchdowns tomorrow, everybody, including me, will know it, and we'll be looking for his cards on ComC the second he throws that 7th touchdown pass. That's just one example.
The hobby doesn't grow without people buying and selling cards. Just think about it this way. Every time a T206 Honus Wagner has sold, it's set a record, every single time. So cards need to sell. People need to buy and sell, flip, in order for the hobby to grow, for there to be these headlines, for people to become interested, for people to hear about it and go into their basements and attics, during the epidemic or the pandemic, for people to read about it and hear about it. And it helps. It's a catalyst. You read a headline, you see Ken Golden on CNBC, and now you're like, oh yeah, my sports card collection, I'm going to go do it. Without people buying and selling / flipping cards, the hobby remains stagnant and values don't change, and it's much less exciting. Guys, we are at almost an hour 15. We are well past what we usually like to budget in as an hour-long episode, although I will say the guys did a great job on episode 100 of going to, I think, 100 minutes long, which was great. But this is episode 101. We don't need to go to 101 minutes. We're at we're at 70. We're at 73 minutes right now, fellas. So should we have sort of some parting comments?
Do we have any more topics you wanted to discuss? Have we hit all our topics?
We missed one, but it's a big one.
Let's sit on that for a couple minutes because I think that's a good hobby topic, and Ryan focused on that in his last podcast. So forgive us, but I want Ryan to expound a little more on how he discovered it, was what he discovered in his podcast.
Sure. So what Rich is alluding to is some fake PSA slabs, and what Ryan referred to as the best one he'd ever seen. It was, I believe, a Michael Jordan PSA 5, if I recall from your video, Ryan. Yep. But Ryan, why don't you just sort of share with the audience, the chat, and Rich and myself, how you discovered this and what your general thoughts are on what people should be doing in as far as protecting themselves from these potential fake slabs.
Yeah, so 2 weeks ago, there was the Clearwater card show, and one of my friends was a dealer there, and he ended up buying 5 slab cards from 2 different guys. There's a team of 2 people that are working in Florida to pass off fake slab cards. So what ended up happening, and he didn't authenticate cards. He's one of those people that buys and sells a lot. So when he sees cards, they're slabbed, okay, I'll buy it. First guy came into his booth and sold him 3 Michael Jordans that were graded. Oh, it was like 1 5, a 3, and a 4, something like that. And he bought those. 30 minutes later, another guy comes there with another Jordan and a Tom Brady. The other Jordan also had a new version of the slab. The Tom Brady had an older version of a PSA slab. So he bought 5 cards off of 2 guys that ended up working together for about $20,000. And then he posted those cards on eBay during the week. Again, I had no idea any of this was happening. And there was a thread on Blowout forums, and people are saying this guy is selling fake slabs and fake cards all over eBay. Report his eBay listing. And my friend texted me. He's like, hey, I know you do all this stuff. You bought off me in the past. I'm a dealer. All these people are calling me out for these Jordans that I bought. I'm pretty sure they're real. They are in a PSA case. They have the lighthouse and everything like that. There's no way this is fake. Can you help me out? Can you tell people that these are real? And he sent me the pictures of them. And the Jordans inside the case were way off. Like, they're really, really bad fakes. But the PSA slab was decent. Like, from a distance, if you don't know the minor details of the slab, you would think it's real. It has the lighthouse, has a lot of the minor details on it. So we agreed to take a look at them Friday at the Orlando card show, brought them over here, and I started documenting all the different ways that this case was slightly different than a PSA case. But I will say, like, remember a few months ago when there's the BGS case that went into the market and it looked really, really close? Like, unless you knew the minor details, you couldn't really tell. It was the same thing with this PSA case. A normal person will not be able to tell this case unless they really, really analyze the case closely and analyze the card that's within it. For me, the biggest takeaways from that case, first, the surface was way different. I could slide really, really easily on the case rather than a PSA one, which is harder to slide. Also on the case as well, I put it next to my ear. You could hear it crunching all around because it wasn't held together as well as the actual PSA cases. And you could actually put your fingernail all around it and kind of prop open the case as well. There's a few other minor details, like the lighthouse was slightly off. The font was a little bit different as well as the barcode, but it was scary. Now, PSA took those 5 cards and deactivated them on their website. But the fact remains that these guys have not been caught. They were able to pass off 5 to this dealer. Imagine how many other shows that they're hitting up and passing off these cases. It's to the point which is kind of scary that now you have to authenticate the card within the slab. People sent cards to grading companies for the authenticity of the card, and then the grade was the second part of it. Again, buying the eye appeal rather than the grade, but that's been changing now because now people are sending it just for the grade, and you have to now authenticate the card itself. And a lot of people just aren't going to authenticate the cards because they don't have that knowledge or just don't want to.
Yeah,
I will tell you that it's not endemic, but it's been an issue for a while. My good friend Leon Lucky, who runs the Net 54 Vintage chat board, which is the most influential chat board when it comes to pre-war cards out there. He's been forced into situations where he's had to monitor stuff like that, and he talks about some of the people he's talked to who have been involved in some of these fake slabs. And it's a scary situation because you can get the machine from China. Now, granted, you can get a slabbing machine from China and you can make up your own slabs. And that's one of the ways we have all these new grading companies, because yes, there are bad people out there, but you also have new grading companies. And so what if you decide, instead of creating a new grading company, you say, I want to try to make a fake? And it's, as you said, Ryan, it's really hard to catch. You have to know what you're looking for. And one of the greatest people I knew at catching stuff like that, we lost last week during the Chicago Card Show, a gentleman by the name of Jim Flett, who worked with Levi Bleem at 707 Sports Cards. We lost him during the card show, and we're dedicating this to episode, and rightly so, to one of our Hobby Hotline family, Chris Carlin. But Jim knew so much about cards, and he's going to be missed by all who knew him. When the news got posted on Net 54, it was an all-star roster of people who knew Jim and said, he's going to be really missed. So we miss him too. We miss everybody. But you're right. It takes an expert to know what's going on with these slabs. And it's hard. And just be alert. And if you don't know, ask for help.
Good advice. Good advice. Okay, guys. Well, with that, let's wrap up this episode. So want to thank my co-host tonight, Rich Klein and Ryan from Breakout. Thank you both for joining us. Thank you to the chat for some really great interactive comments today. And I'm going to throw up, just to end this off, again, the post that Chris Carlin made on Facebook to commemorate the loss of his brother John to ALS. The hobby sends their condolences to him and the family. This episode was dedicated to John and the Carlin family. So I'm going to throw that up, take us off the screen, and we will end the episode there. Guys, hang tight in the back room for a moment. And thank you, everybody, for joining Hobby Hotline episode 101 on this Saturday, November the 27th.